So being a part of the food industry is quite unique, as it's one of the few fields of work that where you're obviously being part of it professionally and being in the industry, but you're also a consumer and the end user in your personal life at the end of it. So when I was approached to talk about this in the concept of radical reframe and how it has changed the food industry with the pandemic, I was kind of slightly confused about what angle I should be taking, because the world has changed drastically for both sides of the coin, whether it's people in the industry or, like all of us being the end users. So I am going to try and give you sides of both the sides, and maybe many of you can relate to certain aspects of my talk here today. So I'll start from the point of view as a customer. So currently, with the modern trend of all of us increasingly dining out, it has become more evident that people's likes and dislikes in terms of food and cuisines are constantly evolving, and because there's a daily decision of what do we eat and what do we cook as well. So I strongly believe that most of the food that we eat and we like to cook, or what we see food in general, is it's kind of serves as a mirror to our upbringing and our culture, and that what we've been part of and where someone has been brought up as well. For me personally, the fact that I'm from a South Indian family who's been raised in Dubai, and then I went on to study in a very multicultural city like London, and then I also learned in I specialize with French pastry techniques. So it's a lot of cultures together that has that I view food as right now, and the way I cook food and the way I develop food as well. But as keeping all of this in mind, I think most of us, I have seen this increasingly with a lot of people, that we think of us as purists when it comes to the food that we want to cook or the food we want to eat, and we don't want to mix in different cultures, combining something that's very quintessentially important, like an ingredient, like say from like South America, and then you add it to something Indian like a dosa, and most of us are like, no, that does not work, because we don't see it as something that's a pure food, and you would see it kind of as bizarre. But the fact that the intermingling of cultures all along is what has given us the food that we have today, is what we don't kind of think of. The very interesting fact is that when we think of Japanese cuisine, we think of salmon sashimi or salmon sushi. But the fact that salmon was not even a fish that is found in Japan, and it is always mostly imported from Norway, is something that most of us did not know. And it was a very long marketing and advertising strategy by the Norwegian government to make salmon a very common fish that is eaten in Japan. And it's an invention more than anything else. It's a Norwegian invention, and but it has become one of the things that you think of when you think of like Japanese cuisine. So it is important to realize that what food is today has come from evolving over centuries and borrowing from other societies. And the fact that it has changed is because of the influence of wars and diseases, migration and colonization. And a very important fact that potatoes, and even chili for that matter, was not part of in India at all. Potatoes were in fact brought by the Portuguese in the 17th century to India. And when you think of that, the fact that, probably something like an aloo paratha was not even seen, it was probably seen as an alien dish because it was not something that people had seen. When you think of it that way, you realize that, it's the intermingling and like over and also the fact that like diseases, like even pandemics, that has changed the way that we eat. And like if our ancestors did not accept like the Persian or the Arab idea, or maybe the Mughal idea of mixing rice and meat, we wouldn't probably be eating biryanis now. and right now it's seen essentially as like an important dish from the Indian subcontinent. So reframing food and the way that we eat that has been happening over the course of centuries. So currently, with the pandemic from 2020, it has, the food that we eat has radically changed. The way we eat it, the way we cook it has changed a lot, because a lot of us found joy and solace in staying home and cooking new food. The internet helped a lot with giving us new recipes, and uh, and the fact that it was, when we were all stuck at home, we were just getting a lot more innovative and bolder in the way that we wanted to try out new things. And the food, and it's always constantly evolving with every culture around the world. But that being said, at the same time, the way we view food health and safety in terms of food has also changed, and that comes to my other point of how it is with the food industry. It has impacted the restaurant industry in a major way. So when I started working in the industry full-fledged, that's when I saw how much it has changed, because I also got in right after the pandemic started. So like Ankit had introduced me, and he said that I had been doing bespoke cakes from home from a long time. The first few weeks of COVID were an absolute nightmare for the entire industry, but for me in general, from when I had my small business, uh, lockdowns were leading to restaurants shutting down, and we didn't know when anything was opening again. And business in general was at an all-time low, and for me personally, it was literally brought down to a standstill, where I used to make at least 8 to 10 cakes in a week personally, and it came down to probably just one in a week. Um, but that being said, that statistic totally turned around pretty quickly, because people started realizing that my scale of operations was much smaller, and having a team of literally just me also lowered the risk of the spread of virus, and people generally just felt more comfortable ordering and getting their cakes from a small business, and it ended up being the year that I made the highest number of cakes. So in that sense, a lot of small businesses really flourished, but on the same spectrum, on the other side, bigger businesses really got affected, and in a lot of ways, especially because of the fact that most professional kitchens are really small. They're tightly, very small cramped spaces, very not well ventilated spaces. So it kind of became a super spreader for the virus. And so the way the restaurants worked and the way kitchens worked had to change drastically, and they had to bring in measures as to uh, wearing face masks, having more safe distance between people, had to cut down on staff, and even something like hand washing, which is a funny fact that in before the turn of the 19th century, even doctors didn't know that hand washing like lowered the risk of diseases. And even when the pandemic hit and it became like a big thing, especially in London, when the prime minister started saying that you need to sing happy birthday for 20 seconds, and then that 20 seconds is the minimum of how hand washing helps you lower the risk of the spread of the virus. So these kind of things really changed. And then but with the time, and more studies and research came out, and people became calmer, and sound judgment kind of kicked in, and eventually people built control around their lives, and restaurant businesses started getting back to normal. Not exactly in the pre-COVID era kind of time, but the fact that restaurants started doing more takeaways, more deliveries, and even fine dining places like Michelin star restaurants started doing these cook at home concepts, and it worked with almost all strata of society, because even the rich were getting the food that they were used to eating, which was more richer and finer foods, and but then they could do cook at home sort of concepts where it's sort of like, fueling their hobbies, and it has become very, it's something that a lot of people have started picked up as a hobby as well during the pandemic. um, People basically found a way to get on with life. So, but with this new lease on life, it became extremely important for food providers that they maintained health and safety protocols in their kitchens. Many operations had to be literally like radically reframed, with new procedures being put into place to ensure that the consumers, as well as the employees' well-being, were on top of the criticality charts. A year into COVID, like I mentioned earlier, I was lucky enough to be part of a commercial kitchen, and it was a game changer because people and restaurants were working very differently, and they're completely changing their way of working despite having followed a specific style for literally ages. Um, there were like the government and the municipality and they were all the making sure that restaurants were enforcing the procedures quite strongly. There were fines being meted out to rule breakers. The change was made even more drastic considering the fact that the spaces are quite small. It was extremely important for everyone to be alert and on their toes when it came to safety procedures. So it's now been 2 years, and I don't see restaurants kind of going back to how it was in the pre-COVID style era of working anymore. This has now become the norm, and I don't think anyone can predict what it's going to be in the next decade. But that being said, I'm sure that there has been a huge change in the way we eat, the way we view food as well with the pandemic, which probably we don't see yet, like most of the other things I mentioned earlier with like migrations and colonization and how things had changed over the course of centuries. Maybe the pandemic has also changed the way that we view food, and also the fact that people are concerned about their health now, and we're all constantly as being a food provider. I'm also constantly thinking about adding how to add more healthy ingredients, how to make food more healthy, how is this going to affect people's lives by eating something that we eat for a long period of time. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but in hopefully in a good way, that it's pushing us to the right path. And as a community in general, but as also in the restaurant industry and as food providers, we need to understand that helping others will help us grow as a whole, and we need to get over the notion that only helping ourselves would get us to the peak. That might be true for a while, but that success will be short-lived. So it's also time to reframe the way that we think about ourselves. Um, like obviously, when I'm talking about food industry in general, we've started having more chefs collectives, and where we can think of how we need to do this better as a community, and worldwide. um so yeah, that's my two sides of the coin, and how the industry has been pushed to radically reframe the way that we think in a consumer point of view and also as a food provider. And I hope I've given few points that has made you think and made you understand that how our industry works and how we're constantly pushing to get better, and how the pandemic has changed our lives in all the ways that it has. So thank you for this opportunity, and